Simic decks love ramping and drawing cards, but what if every spell you cast costs another one from your deck for free? That's exactly what Quandrix the Proof does best, and once those spells start cascading, the advantage starts escalating. Hi everyone, I'm Full Harmonicon, and welcome back to the channel. If you enjoy synergy-focused commander breakdowns that help you get more out of decks without needing the most expensive staples, you're in the right place. So hit that subscribe. Today, we're diving into the next Strixhaven Elder Dragon founders, and this one might be the most Simic commanders we've seen in a while. Get ready to get mathematical. It's Quandrix the Proof. And if you enjoy ramping fast, drawing tons of cards, and turning every spell into even more spells, this deck is for you. Quandrix is a 6/6 Elder Dragon with flying and trample for 6 mana. It comes with Cascade, which means when you cast it, you exile cards from the top of your library until you hit a cheaper non-land spell, and you get to cast it for free. That's already solid value. But here's where things get really interesting, and this is the ability the entire deck is built around. Every instant and sorcery you cast from your hand also has Cascade. So now it's not just Quandrix cascading, it's everything in the deck. Every ramp spell, every draw spell, every interaction piece. Once Quandrix hits the board, you're not just casting spells anymore. You're chaining them together into these ridiculous value turns that just keep going. The overall strategy is actually pretty straightforward. First, we ramp, and we ramp hard. We want to get Quandrix out as quick as possible, because that's when the deck really turns on. Then, once Quandrix is online, we start casting instants and sorceries to generate as much cascading value as possible. And finally, we win by overwhelming the board, usually by turning all that spell slinging into a massive army of tokens. It's simple in theory, but once it gets going, it feels absolutely explosive. This is where the deck really shines. These spells don't just do their thing. Each one multiplies into even more value. Wisdom of the Ages is an incredible late game bomb. It basically reloads your entire hand with spells you've already cast, letting you fire them off again, and cascade all over again. Yes please. Mind's Desire is another huge payoff. Every cascade you've done before casting this has added to the storm count, so even though the copies themselves don't cascade, their initial cast still does. And you're suddenly playing a massive chain of spells for free. Then there's Mnemonic Deluge, which is just absurd. Copying an instant and sorcery 3 times is already strong, but here it also cascades for 8. That's a massive swing. Inevitable Betrayal is one of those sneaky cards. It's not big on its own, but if you cascade into it off something cheap, suddenly you're stealing one of the best creatures in the game for basically nothing. That's the kind of value this deck thrives on. For smoother gameplay, cards like Frantic Search are fantastic. It filters your hand, cascades, and untaps your lands, often letting you keep the chain going. And then your classic cantrips, Brainstorm, Ponder, and Preordain, do exactly what we want. They smooth your draws early, and later become perfect cascade hits. Now, not everything in the deck is an instant or sorcery, but these support cards push the strategy even further. Omniscience is exactly as ridiculous as it sounds. Once it's down, every spell you cast is free, which means you could just keep chaining spells and cascades without worrying about mana. Emoti Celebrant of Bounty adds even more cascades onto your bigger spells, stacking the value even higher. Jadzi, Oracle of Arcavios, is super flexible. You can cast it as a creature that lets you play spells and lands off the top of your deck, or as a sorcery that keeps returning to your hand and keeps cascading. Then you've got Apex Devastator, which is just chaos in the best way. A 10/10 for 10 that cascades 4 times. That's exactly the kind of over-the-top value this deck loves. And finally, Hullbreaker Horror gives you control over the board, bouncing threats while you keep casting spells. So how do we win, you ask? Well, we're casting a lot of spells, so naturally we turn that into tokens. Shark Typhoon is the all-star here. Every non-creature spell gives you a flying shark token based on its mana cost. And remember, that includes the cascaded spells too. Dika, Fractal Theorist, and metallurgic summonings do a similar thing, creating tokens equal to the spell's mana value. Talrand Sky Summoner is a classic, giving you 2/2 flyers for every spell. And then cards like Murmuring Mystic and Hermes, Overseer of Elpis, keep the board filled with smaller flyers that apply constant pressure. And finally, Docent of Protection builds up an army that eventually upgrades into a much bigger threat. The key here is that all of these trigger on cast, so Cascade just doubles down on everything. Being in Simic, card draw is never going to be an issue, but here it gets ridiculous. Archmage Emeritus and Archmage of Runes draw you a card every time you cast a spell, which includes your cascaded spells as well. So one spell is easily turning into multiple draws. Rishkar's Expertise is a standout. You draw at least 6 cards with Quandrix out, then cascade from casting it, and then you get to cast another spell for free, which cascades again. Ancestral Vision is the perfect cascade hit. It turns a 1-mana removal spell into remove something and draw 3 cards. Yes, please. Then you've got Dig Through Time and Treasure Cruise, which can be cast cheaply but still cascade into something huge, hopefully. And cards like Urban Evolution, Embrace the Paradox, Eureka Moment, and Lessons from Life all keep your hand full and ahead on land while continuing the cascade chain. Seagate Restoration doubles as a land early and a massive hand refiller later on. Now, interaction is a bit tricky in a cascade deck. We don't want too many hard counterspells because if we cascade into them with no target, it feels awful. So instead, we focus on flexible modal options. Sublime Epiphany is incredible here. It can counter, copy, bounce, or draw depending on what you need, and if you cascade into it, you still get value. Mystic Confluence and Cryptic Command work the same way, always useful no matter how you hit them. Then, cards like Archmage's Charm, Decisive Denial, and Quandrix Charm give you even more flexibility. For dealing with permanents already on the board, you've got things like Natural Reclamation, Heritage Reclamation, and Return to Nature. And of course, staples like Beast Within, Nature's Claim, Pongify, and Rapid Hybridization round things out nicely. Ramp is the backbone of this deck, and we're leaning heavily into instants and sorceries. Skyshard Claim, Explosive Vegetation, and Migration Path all grab multiple lands, which then could hit cards like Cultivate, Kodama's Reach, Harrow, and Entis Restoration, which then could cascade even further into Rampant Growth, Nature's Law, Farseek, 3 Visits, and Shared Roots. It creates this layered system where one spell often turns into 2 or even 3 lands of one ramp spell with Quandrix out. And then options like Growth Spiral and Planar Genesis could whiff but replace themselves if they don't hit a land. And finally, a few lands that stand out. Mystic Sanctuary lets you bring back an instant or sorcery from your grave. Alchemist's Refuge gives everything flash for a turn, which could lead to some very explosive plays. And Mystery's Village makes sure your key spells resolve when it matters the most. Quandrix is about as pure Simic as it gets. You're ramping aggressively, drawing tons of cards, and turning every single spell into even more value. And once those cascades start chaining together, it gets out of hand very quickly. We're not just playing spells, we're building momentum, and eventually that momentum turns into an avalanche your opponents just can't keep up with. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this breakdown, leave a like, drop a comment, and subscribe for more synergy-based Commander content. If you'd like to support the channel further and help shape future videos, memberships are available. And hey, if you're picking up any of these cards, consider using my TCG Player affiliate link down below. And until next time, may all your instants and sorceries cascade into something awesome.